Okay, today I'd like to continue where I left off about navigation. I was talking about navigation and talking about the problem where when you look at a flat piece of paper, all of your natural perceptions, your perception of depth kind of goes out the window. It's you suddenly, your eyes and your own senses, your own depth perception, your own natural depth perception is telling you that you're looking at a flat piece of paper, and it is very hard to sense perspective when your eyes and brain are basically working against you. Um, so anyway, how to get around this? How to deal with this problem of looking at flat things and being able to sense depth in a flat thing. So getting right back into Google SketchUp, it's a 3D program. 3D programs do this all the time. They do a very good job of giving you the idea that you are looking into a three-dimensional space. Um, you know, I can look and see there's a horizon line. There's a horizon line. The horizon line is telling me that everything south of everything, below the horizon line is the ground plane. And I can tell that looking at this ground plane, the further I look down, the closer things appear to be getting. I can very easily judge positions in space. And every time I pick a point in space, it's always relative to something else in space, like the ground plane, for instance. You've got the ground plane. There's this one set here. There's this one little funny area here where all the origin, basically, where all three of these axes are meeting. And this is another known point in space. So whenever I'm placing things in space here, I'm always placing them relative to these known points in space. We know where they are, and so they all serve as reference points or landmarks in space. And it's very easy to get a sense of, how high up things are sitting relative to one another. It's not hard at all. And, if I turn the view, you'll probably notice how this axis, where at the origin where the red and the blue lines are, they form a letter X here, right? If I do it like this, and they form kind of a letter T. But when I look at the X from straight above, you'll see that everything forms right angles. Right angle, right angle, right angle. But as I start to turn downwards, that X begins to flatten out until it inverts. So looking at the horizon line and looking at the way the X flattens out, we can use this to our advantage when we are staring at a white piece of paper here. Okay, we're looking at the white piece of paper. All of a sudden, there's no information. The eyes and brain suddenly take control and say, well, I don't see any reason to believe that this is, a three-dimensional space, so it looks flat to me. I'm going to keep it as a flat space. But wait, the moment we add a horizon line in there, this horizon line can function as a clue. It can function as a bit of information. Functions almost as a landmark to tell us where the ground meets the sky. So that's the first thing. Now, whenever I draw anywhere, wherever my mouse cursor happens to be, these are all scribbles that are sitting on the ground plane. So if I ever make a line, it sits on the ground plane. And then I can make an X. If I make a single X, let's say I make an X, I'm gonna make it in a diagonal fashion. There, we can assume that this X is sitting on the ground. And if I continue the lines through, we can easily make rectangles that sit on the ground. And the more I squish the X, actually if I pick a vanishing point up there, the closer we are to the ground. So if I use a very, very squished X, then we start to get closer and closer. You get that feeling? Whereas if I unsquish the X, now it appears that we're looking down upon the ground. And an X that is very low is going to be like that. Now it almost feels like we are looking straight down upon this X. So the further up you go, the more squished the X's are going to become until you have inverted X's that sit above the viewing, the horizon line. So this is a system of landmarking, a way of placing known points in space that you can use for figuring out, where something is. Because once you place these landmarks, you can begin to construct objects. And once you're above, I'm going to make an inverted. There. So everywhere you go, every time you make something, if you are having trouble getting a sense of perspective, I recommend finding a way to landmark things and pay attention to your landmarks so that you avoid making mistakes. I think if anything, this would probably be a little less. There. And now that I have these two buildings, these buildings can be used to further build off of. The moment I put that line, we get the sense that this line is sticking to the building, and now I can continue to fashion lines that appear to be going off in space. And I'm using my own sense of perspective. I've regained it through my landmarks. So that's one way of dealing with the landmarks. Later on, when you start dealing with things like anatomy, let's say for instance a leg, you may have the gesture. The gesture is these sets of lines, but you can landmark the center point of the leg. Shifting the center point of the leg further up towards that end is going to tell me that this end is further away and one end is coming closer. It's another system of landmarking to help me with navigation. How do I navigate things so that they go further away from me? How do I get them to feel as if they're coming towards? So all of drawing is always, whenever you're drawing, it's a constant struggle to maintain your sense of perspective. And you may have to landmark things. You may have to decide, based on these known points in space here on this cylinder, how far am I gonna, where am I gonna push things? Where am I gonna push space? And when you start a drawing, you have to consider how large your subject matter is going to be. How much space are you going to have to create for your subject matter? Because if you're going to create, say, a jumbo jet, and you want to be standing pretty close to this jumbo jet, then it makes sense to create as much space as necessary as that jumbo jet is going to take up. So in this case, it's like I'm creating a gymnasium for the jumbo jet to fit inside. Now I can say, well, the jumbo jet's maybe about sitting in the middle. Its wingspan is about this wide. Tail is back here, front's there. So that's the end of that. Signing off.